This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast brought to you by the Genesis Company, coming at you Wednesday morning. It's November 1st. The Wolves play the Denver Nuggets tonight at Target Center. Obviously, this is their first game after a pretty brutal loss in Atlanta on Monday, where they had a 19-point lead at halftime and ended up losing by 14 points. I'm here with Wolves beat writer Jace Frederick from the Pioneer Press. Jace, that's the type of loss that I think is like normally very okay for the beginning of the season. 3 games in, whatever, teams, particularly in today's NBA, blow 20-point leads all the time. But this is a pattern for the Wolves and this group in particular. For what I think really actually makes this an interesting topic is you can't really blame Rudy for it, because for 3 years now, the Wolves have been getting 20-point leads, and often, not all the time, but often watching them, completely disintegrate, which obviously precedes Rudy's time here. So I don't know why this isn't maybe the most fun topic to be discussing. It's definitely the topic around the Wolves right now is, what is behind these Wolves meltdowns, not just the one in Atlanta on Monday, but over the last few years. And because you can somewhat remove Rudy from this, I think the 3 places we kind of look here are at the top in Chris Finch, Anthony Edwards, and Karl Anthony Towns, and like quote unquote assigning blame. I don't think there's one person that's more than anyone else, but we're just trying to diagnose why this is happening over and over again. You wrote about this yesterday at the Pioneer Press. Start me off by, like, you're sitting down and you're like, okay, I know I need to write about the Wolves consistently blowing big leads. I've noticed everyone on Twitter thinks it's all Finch, or it's all Cat, or it's all Ant, or it's the Rudy trade, or call a timeout. Like, when you sit down, you go, okay, I have to write a true and real story about what is going on here with this team consistently doing this. Where'd you start?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think part of it is like watching basketball around the league. Like, how do other teams close out games, things they do? Like, and for me, it's just like you watch the best players. Like if you watch Dallas or something, like when they need a bucket, and like Luka is obviously one of the 5 best players in the NBA. Like it's making the right decisions, and it's setting himself up for success. It's setting up his teammates for success, and it's often just making controlled decisions. Like it never feels like he has lost control of the game. He's playing it at his own pace, whatever. Like, and then you watch Minnesota, and it's like, as things start to roll downhill, it's like, what do I notice that's different? And then that's kind of what you use that data in your mind to sit down and come up with like what you think is different. And for me, it totally is like, it's the guys, it's like your best players who are supposed to get you out of the mud in those spots, right? Like they're supposed to be the ones who stem the tide. They're supposed to be the ones who like can kind of correct course for the game. And so often for me, when I'm watching the game, it's like, Minnesota's best players are the ones who are like contributing to this. And they are the ones who are giving it the snowball effect where a 10-0 run for the opponent turns into a 19-2 run for the opponent. And that's just something we've seen a couple years in a row now. And that's not like, yes, there are things, and I even said this, like, yeah, there are things like you can do differently as a coach. And frankly, like, I agree, like, yep, Chris Finch could have changed, the pick and roll coverage and whatnot. But at the same time, it is kind of like, we also think they should get good at certain things, and like, and maybe adapt. And so for me, it really kind of comes down to like, what are your best players doing? And for me, and I just think that is where you should always point the blame to start out. What are the best players doing? They're the ones who are paid the most. They're the ones with the biggest expectations, and rightfully so. And I just think that time and time again, and we've noticed it so many times now, that it's like, this is what they do. Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns, who I think it's not even unfair at all. I think even the Standard Observer would say they've got a lot of bad habits, and there are things that even gets brought up all the time, like even by Finch and the players themselves, and like, how do you correct them?
Honestly, dude, it's the reason for optimism with this team.
Yeah, is that they are correctable. Yes.
Yeah.
Like,
or that they exist.
It's
and that they're reasonably correctable. Yeah.
Right. But then it's just every single time that things start going bad, they just fall right back into like the worst versions of themselves, which is still not like some terrible player, but it's definitely one that kind of sparks like momentum for the other team when they both, Cat and Ant start taking bad shots and forcing things and bad turnovers. And maybe like Cat starts arguing with Russ a little bit more. Like we definitely saw that too in the Atlanta game, just like not getting back. Yeah, that all to me is the type of basketball that really inspires the other team to be like, wait a minute, we just gone on a 6-0 run and we didn't have to really do anything. Let's keep it rolling here. We've seen a formula that works. Like they're going to force up bad shots. Let's just go. Yeah. Let's just run down the court. And now all of a sudden guys are really flowing. They're feeling themselves. And that happens a lot. So that's just something that when you see it time and time again, it's not like this is one game. Whose fault is it? It's like this happened a lot in the last few years. What are kind of the things that stand out as the consistencies between it all? And to me, like almost every time I'm looking at like, hey, that's a terrible shot. Like, oh, here he goes. He's trying to fix it himself through isolation possessions. And, oh, now Cat's like, well, Ant's struggling. I'm going to try it myself too. And there's just not they just don't kind of revert to like the basketball that the team wants to play in those instances.
You wrote like very basically in your piece, like what this team needs to do to avoid these things. They must move the ball offensively. They must avoid turnovers and take smart shots. And they need to rush back and transition defense.
That's just to win the game anyway, right? Like that should be, if they do those things, Dane, looking at their talent, if they just check those boxes, how many games do they win?
Yeah. It's over 50.
Yeah, a ton. And it's just, it just takes focus to do that.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about that, like those things you list off, moving the ball offensively, avoid turnovers, take smart shots, rush back and transition defense. Like we can take elements of all of that and from the outside looking in, apply some of that to Finch, to Ant, and to Cat, right? Like there's not like any of those areas that all three of them are absolved from, right? Like there's adjustments in there. There's shot taking, there's emotional control. There's all these things that they all kind of put their fingerprints on. And I want to talk about all three of them. I don't think this is a situation where it makes sense to like power rank who's most at blame, because at the end of the day, it's like whatever elements those three hold blame for, it doesn't matter if just one of them fixes it. Like to be the team they want to be, all three of them need to get better in the areas that they're not, that they haven't, that is allowing this to happen. I want to start with Ant again, not because I think he's the most to blame for the losses, but he's been here for all 3 years when these things have been happening.
I should note these things have dated back for a long time. Like there was a year, like Tibbs' first year, I think it was like December, and I remember writing something of like ranking the worst double-digit blown leads of the season. Like they were like 12. So like I guess Cat was even a part of that, but like this is just something that has been around for a while,
and it's something that happens in the NBA.
Yes,
like part of what I think is happening, and this isn't just the fan base. I think this is a reminder for myself too, of these things do happen in the NBA. And like the really good teams, we said this all the time last year when they lose to the Pistons, like the really good teams lose to the Pistons at home. Sometimes it happens. It is the repeating of the behavior that is when I think as a coach or a star player on your team is when you raise your hand, you go like, we got to get this shit together. And that's what's happening here in all of these areas. And with Ant, this being the first year where I think it's like clearly like Ant's the guy, whatever, like he's the best player on the team. I think that's where my mind goes to first here, because I watched that game, or I watched kind of these first 3 games, and I see the shot selection issues. And that was more so, I thought, the Toronto game than the Atlanta game, where that just kind of led to a crumbling from Ant. I personally, when I was watching this game back and like assigning blame to Ant, so much of it was just defense for me. And when these things happen where the Wolves melt down, what I see Ant do is not have a sense of urgency on defense, and like finding that balance between I need to get buckets, but I also really need to care on defense to kind of slow this thing down. And that game, I mean, the Atlanta game specifically, right? They've got 2 dynamic guards. So you can't just like Jaden McDaniels solve your problem. Like Jaden, go guard the best player. We've now controlled the point of attack. You need to controlled in two places, Trae Young and DeJounte Murray. And what I'm watching the game and I just feel I'm like, I don't think Ant should be having this job right now. He's not doing the things that are like required to slow down this player. It wasn't all like in pick and roll coverage and drop coverage or whatever, but DeJounte did a lot of damage there. If it's just a straight pick and roll and with Ant and Rudy as the defenders in it, and it's consistently getting exploited, I'm probably going to lean towards blaming Ant just rather than Rudy Gobert in that situation, who's done that tens of thousands of times in his career. And not that Rudy's completely blameless in that, but Ant has not shown the ability to consistently be a defender on the ball in the ways they need him to when a team has multiple defenders. And it got me thinking, I'm like, I feel like at some point I would have just put him kind of in that old D'Lo role. Like, sure, you're the guy off ball and let's not do this. Eventually Finch got to that in the fourth quarter. I didn't remember this till I watched back. He just put Kyle Anderson on DeJounte because what is Finch's thing he always reverts back to at a pinch? It's like Kyle Anderson. You would be like, right, hey, Kyle Anderson, DeJounte Murray, but Finch went through Conley. He went through Ant. Nikhil was getting scored on. Shake was getting scored on, and he gave it to Kyle. They needed that to be Ant in that game, and it's not good that in year 4 you can start making like the argument that Ant needs to be quote unquote hidden on defense sometimes the way Luka is or Harden is or whatever. Like, I get that happens in the NBA where these star players who take on all this massive usage sometimes are hidden, and that's just like a plan. Save your energy for offense. That's not how the Wolves play Ant right now. So when he plays defense like Luka does, I don't know. I think Monday night happens and his guy goes for 41 points on 17 of 24 shooting like DeJounte did. So when I think about Ant in that game specifically, I think about the defense and then I think the offense kind of comes in. That was the order of operations in my mind.
Yeah, and offense certainly was careless turnovers. But defensively, I agree with you. I don't really know if Ant's really ascended as a defensive player at all in the way you would have liked. Like, what is he good at defensively? It's the same physical traits that he's just had for a while. Like, yes, I will take Ant in a one-on-one situation where there is no secondary, no screener involved or anything. It's just like, this guy is trying to take Ant to the hoop. Like, sure, I'll take Ant in that spot every time. But how often is that prevalent in like basketball? You know, like so often you are involved in actions, whether that's chasing, whether that's defending a pick and roll, like, and I don't feel like he's gotten a ton better at those things. So that hopefully throughout the course of the season here for him is something that, you know, they are really drilling in with him. He is putting a lot of attention to detail and pride into. You know, you constantly talk about adding to your offensive skill set, like defensively. Learn to read the game a little bit more. Learn how to like work through pick and rolls, you know, all these types of things. Like, how do you like rear contest successfully? Like, these are all things that Ant hasn't picked up yet. Like you said, it's now year 4. It's like, okay, you should be progressing in some of these areas. I don't feel like you're any more effective in a lot of these than you were before. Like, you have all the physical tools to be a great defender, but you have to see it. And that's true. Like, that's been true for other guys in the past, you know, where it's like, well, he should be good. But there's like a want to, and there is a growing understanding that you have to have of the game as well. So those are things. And then offensively, though, I would say I didn't always love the shot selection. And like, even when you're like getting into the paint, and I noticed this a lot in that game, and I kind of looked at the numbers just through 3 games, like Minnesota's like getting to like not the rim, but the like
fringes
5 to 14 foot range. And so Finch like threw out the stat of like 2 for 13 in the third quarter at the rim. It's like, nope, 2 for 13 in the paint. And in the paint's a pretty big area. And a lot of these, it's like you are on the edge of the paint. I was looking like,
I like that
at the rim in for the league right now, they are like bottom 3rd and just like number of attempts at the rim.
Interesting.
Within 5 feet. It's maybe they're like 18 or 19, just quick glancing at this. And then 5 to 9 feet, they are the number 1 team in shot attempts per game.
Interesting.
Which is not a layup. You know, like, and a lot of these are contested, like, you know, trying to put it up over another big, like Ant driving in and trying to put it up over somebody else. Not like a terrible shot, but not like these are
Or
not
it's
like
like a
these are not
cap
the high
post up.
efficiency shots. Yeah.
It's like a
And
cap post up where he isn't really burying the guy all the way at the rim. It's kind of, again, shooting it from like 8 feet rather
correct.
than, yeah.
And these are the ranges where teams all shoot like 42 to 45%. Like they are less than a point
Yeah.
per possession shots.
Mhm.
And then like 10 to 14 feet. Minnesota is sixth in the NBA in attempts in those spots. And so it's
Interesting.
like you are living, it's not, they don't look like mid range when you're watching the game, but it's like fringe of the paint where it's not any like, it's really not an efficient shot and they're settling for it. And it's usually contested because you're not getting all the way to the rim.
Mhm.
So you can say like, yeah, at the rim, we shot this. It's like, no, that's in the paint and the edge of the paint is far different than in the restricted area. And you're not
Right.
getting to the restricted area. So like, I think there are issues there as well. And maybe that comes down to personnel, but Ant's taking a lot of those shots too. So I think even you could say like, well, he put his head down and got inside. It's like, but he's not getting to the right spot. And maybe sometimes there has to be more trust in the kick out at that point. I don't know what it is, but offensively, they've certainly had some struggles in the second half was one of those too. And it's just, sometimes I just don't love like the general, like most efficient shots you want in the game. I don't feel like they're getting them that often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's to pick that apart. There's probably a lot of different reasons why, right? Like, I think of that more as a spacing thing of
Right. So
like,
do I.
you know, how is Ant stopping short? I mean, I've seen Ant actually take a couple floaters this year. He normally, you know, hasn't really taken those. Like Rudy, you know, I've freaked out about Rudy having a push shot and all that. And those are important things for those guys to add.
Yeah.
Right. It's important for Ant to have a floater game. It's important for Ant at 8 feet to be able to effectively throw a lob. It's important for Rudy to not dribble it and turn it over at 8 feet. But you use those shots, you take advantage of those shots when the team is taking away the rim. And it doesn't feel like the opponents have been taking away the rim. It just kind of feels more so like the Wolves aren't getting there. Is that what you're saying, you think?
A little bit. I do think like things are getting contested at that point. I still think they're just not effectively using Rudy as like the outlet drop down. I really don't. Like it's like if like a Capella's picking up, it's like how else can you get the ball to Rudy in those spots rather than kind of settling yourself for a contested 8-footed runner or something to that effect. Like I just really think there shouldn't be a way that teams can, you know, like deter you at the rim, or teams should be able to really like force you into a tough shot when you have like a Rudy there. I still just think Minnesota's not good enough at using Rudy.
I don't
like Rudy should have a 20-point game at some point. Like, I mean, in that Heat game, like the fact that I thought yes, they played well or whatever in the second half, like that was a 20-point Rudy Gobert game written all over it. And it doesn't happen because I just don't think they find enough ways to use the easy opportunities that he presents.
Well, I mean, I think it's like scar tissue from last year of however many turnovers they had trying to force it to Rudy in that area or whatever. And now it's kind of like it's there. When Carl's playing now, they're really leaving Rudy open there. We're not saying leaving Rudy open for a post up, like leaving Rudy open in the dunker spot for like maybe not even like a drop step dribble dunk, just like he's just open in that area. I don't want to completely
I veered way off. But
I want to keep talking about Ant, but I think the Ant part kind of combos into some of the Finch stuff. I mean, Finch obviously connects to both Ant and Cat. So we'll take a quick break, but I want to then we'll move over to Finch. And today's show is brought to you by Falling Knife Brewing Company. We've obviously been telling you all year or for years now that Falling Knife is showing all the Wolves games in their tap room. I think that is becoming an increasingly relevant thing now that the games are getting increasingly difficult to watch at home, as Bally Sports, whether it be the app or on the broadcast, I guess, is having trouble having these games effectively be broadcasted. Predominantly, as I understand it, the issues Bally's having right now is with the app. Falling Knife does have like the cable provider ability to show the game. So if you're like me on Monday and you sat down to watch the game and you use the Bally Sports app like I do, and it crashed, and you don't want to run that risk again, and maybe you live in Minneapolis, you're close by, Falling Knife always does have the games on there and the sound on as well. So keep Falling Knife on your radar, whether it be tonight for the Denver game. I'm sure a bunch of people will be there against Denver in a big matchup. Also, then they got Saturday against Utah, and this coming Monday against Boston. So that's Falling Knife Brewing Company, Northeast Minneapolis. All right, Chase. Let's continue assigning blame. Pointing to the things that we would like to see Ant do differently, Cat do differently, Finch do differently. The coaching one is always difficult. And I feel like when I was like talking to some people on Twitter, I felt like I was kind of defending Finch. But that was mostly just like frustration with people being like, double team, call timeouts, play zone. I don't think those are the issues here. I think what people, when they're saying those things, or they're saying make adjustments, and to that end, I do feel like that's fair to point to Finch in these situations, in these games that have happened very many times where they've been up 20, that they've blown a lead. And it's not always, but when this happens, I think Finch either doesn't make adjustments, is maybe too slow to make adjustments, or, and I'm not in the huddle, so I don't know, he's making the adjustments and the players aren't doing them. And then maybe he isn't enforcing and demanding, like, hey, we said we were going to adjust and we're going to do this differently. And whoever, you didn't do this, like maybe you got to come out of the game, or maybe I got to put a group of 4 or 5 guys out there that I feel really confident will do those things. I think that is a very difficult thing as a coach, when the people you have to hold accountable are your 2 best players. I do think that that's part of the job, though. And given that this is a pattern of behavior thing, that this has happened numerous times for over 3 different seasons, I think it's fair to point some blame at Finch. We could get into maybe some more specific things, but I think there's, maybe you and I disagree here a little bit. Like, I think you, if we are power ranking it, you put a lot more on the players and maybe a little bit less on Finch than I do. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, but I mean, I also agree that adjustments can be made, for sure. But I also think, like, what's challenging about this is in game 3 of the season, I sometimes think like you're trying to get really good at what you want to do. And it's like, whether that's certain pick and roll coverages or whatnot, it's like, we are going to be this team. We are going to be like this drop team with Rudy. Let's get as good at it as possible. There's going to be some struggles throughout the way, whatever. Yeah. But it's different when it is like a year 3 of things like this, or year 2 of this, where it's like, we just can't drop for some teams. So do we need to adjust off of it? Like, I think there is something about setting a tone or like developing your identity early in a season. But like when it is kind of a continuance as well, like sometimes you have to be willing to shift off of things. And sometimes it would be great if you could shift off things for a half of one game and then get back into what you do.
Sure.
But it is very much like a thing of, I often do think like the players can also have some things, doing things differently themselves. Like offensively, I'm very much like Ant and Cat kind of do the same things over and over again. Like no matter what, like, yeah, they have more play calls and stuff. And I've even seen some of those play calls like in the Atlanta game, but you watch them, the play calls being run to get things started at the beginning of the play, and they run so haphazardly that it doesn't even matter. It's literally like you might as well have just given Ant the ball, because the way that he just ran off that stagger screen, like he's essentially just coming to get the ball. So what difference does it make? But you know, so like sometimes I do think like there are things that look like the coach isn't doing anything, but what he's calling isn't being executed. And I do think, as much as you don't want to like make moves that raise questions or like looks like you're sounding the alarms in game 3 of a season, I do think sometimes you got to be like, look, our offense is terrible right now. So I'm even going to take one of Ant or Cat out of the game, because you can't both be ball stoppers. We can't afford that. We're going to put the ball in Kyle's hands because Mike Conley is sick or whatever. And we're going to run some other offense that doesn't as much involve you guys, or you're going to be in the corner or whatever, because we can't just keep doing these things over and over again. And hopefully you guys can watch and see what we're doing that stems the tide or whatever. And that can make a difference. Defensively, that one, sometimes it is like, let's change up your pick and roll coverage or something. I understand that this is the type of team you want to be, but it can be a little tough when like maybe like the coverage just wasn't good enough, but now this guy is hot. And he is kind of really on a
that's
roll.
The coverage question is the hot hand thing, right? Which, you know, different people are going to think different things with that.
Well, What's your stance on drop coverage? We've talked about this a lot probably in the past, but I am just kind of the belief that you need some really elite guys running drop for it to be a great coverage.
You need, I think in the NBA more broadly today, like, I don't know, it was like 10 years ago, everybody just started playing drop, right?
Yeah.
And it was really like the analytic movement, right? Like, let's force
Yes.
as many mid-range shots as possible. And it was when I think why it started really working was players like had in their ear from their coaching staff of like, let's try and limit the amount of mid-ranges you're taking. And it was this like collision between analytics and that player's human nature, where it just got like awkward, where they're like, okay, I'm open here at 17 feet. Like, what, you don't want me to shoot this?
Right.
And I think over the course of many years now, like, players have just gotten more comfortable with that, understanding it and knowing it. And to that end, like, while I know it's kind of been like dispelled up and down, like as a hot hand fallacy, like,
right,
there is something to be said about when you have the hot hand from doing the same thing over and over again. Like,
yeah, you're
I
not just
believe in
forcing
that.
up anything because you have a hot hand, but you
Yes.
are more likely to make the wide open shot that you
Mhm.
just made 3 other times. Like,
Yes, exactly. Like, I think that checks out, and that's what happened with DeJounte Murray in this game, and he's a really interesting like case study for this, where he is a dude who shoots a ton of mid-range shots. Like, I was looking it up after the game, he led the league in the frequency of taking mid-range shots for combo guards last season. Like, he's going to take them if you give it to him. So with that type of player, I think you can make the argument that like we might need to adjust things like throughout the course of the game and change his coverage. And I do, in the fourth quarter, they kind of started bringing Rudy up on him. I think it's kind of wrong to say that Finch made like no adjustments in this game. Different guys guarded Murray. They sort of switched coverages. Maybe it was too late. I think that would be something to rip on him here. But to answer your question, sorry, about drop coverage, I think to make it work today, because teams are more comfortable at playing against it, I think about it so much more about the guard who
got to be so aggressive. I think
it's got to be the Marcus Smart, the Drew Holiday. You said rear view contest earlier, and maybe not everybody knows what that is. It's it's a pick and roll. You're the guard. You're going over the top of the screen. The ball handler's coming in to shoot the mid range jump shot right there, and out of their rear view mirror, they should be able to feel you, see you coming to contest your shot. Those weren't there in that game from Ant. Nikhil had a few of them. They weren't really there from Shake when he was on DeJounte. And
I will say for Nikhil, like, just watching that game, like, when DeJounte scored on Nikhil, like, there were some tough hits on Nikhil.
Totally.
Like the threes he was hitting, I was like, Nikhil's there.
Yeah.
I mean, like, that's just a guy who is rolling. Like,
it felt like when DeJounte was scoring on Nikhil, it reminded me of Nikhil guarding Jamal Murray in game 5. You know,
sure,
where it was like, okay, you kind of like shrug at that.
Right.
But generally speaking, this team did not do a good job of those rear view contests. And a lot of that was because I went through it. DeJounte had 34 possessions. He took a shot, had an assist, or committed a turnover. And 11 of those were against Ant. And that's because he was having, it wasn't necessarily that Ant guarded him the most possessions. It was the cleanest in those spots. So by not having the rear view contest, not having the guard really, as you said, like, be physical and be up there and making that difficult, it really opens up the opportunity for a good mid-range player like DeJounte Murray to go off in that sort of way. I think it was just kind of also some sort of unfortunate circumstance where Mike Conley's pretty good at that. He has food poisoning. He guarded him the first 5 possessions, and then like they went away from it, which maybe like leads me to believe Mike was like, yo, Finch, if you want me to play like 30 minutes tonight, like I probably can't be chasing guys around. Like, I was puking last night, the whole night. And then McDaniels is on a minutes restriction. Yeah. Like, if Jaden could play 36 minutes in that game, then you have him maybe toggle a little bit between Trae Young and DeJounte Murray. Or you at least have that possibility. Jaden only guarded him on one of those 34 possessions, and it was when Trae Young was out of the game. You know, so
sure, right.
It was kind of like a bad circumstance. Atlanta's tough with 2 guards who can punish you in that action. And I didn't feel like in that game, the Wolves had two guys who could do it. They had Jaden, and they needed the second guy to be Ant, and Ant wasn't there for that.
Yeah, I do think we kind of have to like change our calculation of where Ant Setter's defender. Like we always do like to like talk about what he could be. And sometimes you have to kind of talk about a guy like how he is. And we do now have a pretty good idea of like the matchups that Ant will give you problems in and the matchups that you will give Ant problems in on that end of the floor. And Atlanta is probably one that you would pick ahead of time and go like, those aren't really guys that you just get physical with and then that's it. You know, like you have to be comfortable defending a lot of actions and Ant just is not.
And so I think like to the extent maybe that this is where we are giving Finch a little bit of a pass in that game is like he might not have had the
personnel
depth of personnel to be able to guard both Trey and DeJounte. I think there's other elements of the Finch thing that are maybe outside of the Atlanta game when they've lost this. It's the third quarters, right? Like we saw that time and time again last season, particularly when the Wolves would get up big by like 15, 20 going into halftime. They're like, you could almost know it was going to be a big letdown to start the third quarter. And I don't know, maybe I don't know enough about coaching to like understand what role a coach plays in that. But tell me if this resonates with you. So the last play of the second half is like the Kyle Anderson going down, trying to get the buzzer beater layup before time expires. He gets there, but misses the layup. And there's this like, not to be like the fun police, but, everyone's kind of like laughing and like, pick Kyle up and, it's cool, man. Like we're up by 19. Like,
yeah.
And I remember that type of stuff happening last season, literally at the end of the second quarter where like the Wolves are killing, it's the Ant and Cat are nailing all these shots and as they were. And there's this like when that little bit of casualness comes in at the end of the second quarter,
they think they've won.
Like they think they've won.
They think they've won. Yeah.
And again, pattern of behavior. We've seen that time and again. And if I'm Finch, that's what I'm thinking about as I'm walking into that locker room. As I felt that casualness at the end of the second quarter, we get punked in the third all the time. Like lock in, And I'm obviously I'm sure we're not there. I'm sure he's saying some of these things, but
he's not like, great job, guys. We did it. Got these guys dead.
Kyle, you'll get the next layup.
Start thinking about where you're going for dinner after this game. Let's just get out there, finish these last 24 and come back in and celebrate.
But we can put some of it on Finch, right?
You got to do something. Yeah, right.
It's like it's third quarters, which is also kind of like spills into that managing personalities type part of being a coach. I think that's where we can hold Finch's feet to the fire a little bit more, given how many times we've seen this.
It's just such a weird thing. Like, okay, and I don't want to keep going back to this, but again, it was Tibbs' first season. Like, they sucked in the third quarters. Like, they were terrible. And you just put it back then to like immature team. Andrew Wiggins, Zach LaVine, Karl Anthony Towns, all like 21, 22, whatever. Like, immature group. Like, you can still see that now out of like Ant and maybe even a little bit of Jaden. I don't know, but it's like Karl, I think, still has a lot of immaturity to his game, like, and which is unfortunate at this point in his career. But I think they've tried so hard to surround these guys with like veteran players, guys who have been in winning systems before, like who really know how to win basketball games on both ends of the court, are generally like considered smart players, these types of things. And it's like, so then you just wonder, are they not, is there anything that can compensate to like make this team mature? And is the whole point of like it not being a mature team just keep going back to like Ant and Cat or even Jaden? Is he included in that too? I don't know. Like
I throw Nas in there too.
Nas too. Yeah, sure. Right. Yeah. Like, but it's just like with the veterans you have, this can't be an immature team, like that.
And that's
it can't be a characteristic of it. But I don't know. Maybe if like your two quote unquote best players still have a lot of immaturity to their game, maybe that is what you will be. And there's almost no way to compensate for it. Maybe you'll be a decent team, but can't make the jump until they make a jump in that regard. It definitely, I think, has to fall on the coach to get it out of them, because who else can you put it on? Because at some point you can only just keep telling the players to change so much. And then it's like, well, maybe we have to, the coach has to do something different because they're just not getting it on their own. It's a really weird conundrum in my mind, because you do see like it. I do think that third quarter thing comes from a lack of maturity, but there's only really two people like in that starting lineup or in the top 6 rotation. You can definitely get to Nas and maybe a little bit Jaden, but like who's got the ball in their hands? Who's really affecting the game? It's those two guys. So it's very much a thing of like, they're not getting it themselves. So who else is going to get it into their heads of like, no, we need to keep doing this the right way, how we built this lead, whatever. But it's tough because no way a team with Rudy Gobert, Mike Conley, Kyle Anderson playing big minutes should be an immature team.
100%. I don't want to stop talking about Finch because, again, I think all of these have tentacles that connect to.
It's really hard when you try to talk about like a coach, like how do you make sure guys have the right mentality coming out of the locker room? Like there are like Greg Popovich would be like, what do you mean? What am I supposed to do to make sure my guys are ready to play in the third quarter? Like, and I kind of agree with that, especially like when you look at somebody like Cat's age and whatnot, but Ant as well, even it's like, this is now your 4th NBA season. Like, and you've lost a lot of games where you didn't come out ready in the third. So like, maybe you could bring some of your own mentality here of like, let's keep doing things the right way. What have been our talking points all season? Okay. Move the ball. Like, let's get into some structure. Let's have some offensive flow, and defensively, let's do these things back and let's get back. Okay. I'm going to do all those things again, like, that sometimes falls on the player too. Like, I mean, I understand that the coach plays a role in just readiness, but like, I very much am the biggest thing of sometimes how I pull away from coach criticism is I think a lot of onus has to fall on players. I really do. And I think their bigger ones let them down in that Atlanta game in the same ways they've let them down in past spots.
So let's move over to Cat. That's the one we haven't really talked about here yet. Specific to the Atlanta game and what I would have liked to see from Carl, or in any of these times where it's crumbling, is the just kind of just putting it on his back, like effectively, right? Not like killing the ball movement, but finding a way in which he can dominate, an attention to detail of like, I am great. I can stop this run, and that doesn't mean just me scoring. I think about it like a real attention to detail of like, all right, Atlanta started the third quarter 8-0. I am fighting for a deep position here, 8 feet underneath the hoop. They're guarding me with the 4. Like, we're going through me here. And whether that's me just being able to score one-on-one on, Jalen Johnson, or like playing it through me if they're going to come double that, we're going to play out of this and we're going to effectively find something there. Like, I want you mentioned Luka earlier in fourth quarters as like an ant, like a confidence in Luka making good decisions in those situations. And I was watching the Denver game against Utah yesterday, and Jokic does that, right? And not to, obviously Jokic is at a level above Cat, but there is this in that Utah game, Utah Denver's up like 15 the whole time, but Utah really cuts it close for the last 3 minutes. And there was just this, they just did the Murray and Jokic thing, and Jokic just 2-man game took over. And I want to see that. I would love to see that from Carl in one of these situations where a 15-point lead has disintegrated. And Carl was like, or right before it disintegrated, Carl was like, no, I have this. I'm not going to complain about I felt like I was fouled in this situation previously or that, like putting things behind him and being the best player on the floor when his team needs him to be the best player on the floor. It's what the Jokic's do. It's what the Embiid's do in those situations. Not all the time, but the majority of the time. And it's something Carl does rarely, if at all. And that's where in these meltdowns where I would prescribe blame to Carl.
Yeah, I agree. It's weird. Like, he's having a really hard time asserting dominance offensively right now, right? Like, just impacting the game. I don't have to score 30 to be dominant offensively. He hasn't scored 20 in a game yet. And I'm not like a huge numbers guy, but like there are so few times right now where he looks like a dominant presence. It's a challenge.
Can he be like against 4s?
I don't know.
Like, because again, the year before Gobert, we know it. I mean, teams started guarding him with 4s. They started guarding him with the Batums, the Kyle Andersons, the whatever. Like, as we talked about a ton that year, and he was really ineffective as a 5 in the post guarded by 4s. And now that's the matchup he's kind of like always getting. His best spots this season have been when Rudy's off the floor and he's at the 5 and he's facing a backup 5. He's facing Precious Achua in the opener, Thomas Bryant, whatever it might be. Like, you need Karl to be able to be dominant against starting 4s, or if it's the starting 5 that's guarding him too. Obviously, they put Bam on Karl at the beginning of that Miami game. Like, you just need more from Karl to be dominant or just effective in those situations. And I think it's getting reasonable it's becoming reasonable to think that maybe against 4s, he isn't able to be able to consistently do that. And against starting 5s like a Bam, maybe that isn't something that can be relied on yet. I think it's something this team absolutely needs to have happen to make work, or he's got to shoot like 10 threes and shoot like 44%, and that's not happening either. So,
because there's not a whole lot of space right now in the perimeter because those 4s are so comfortable guarding you with their foot speed that he's not getting like the 4 feet off of him like centers were in the past, like where it's just catch it and rip it whenever you want. Now it's like there's not space to do this. But I think like there's like Bams, and those are a little different. Bam's like defensive player of the year type candidate. But just guys in general, like when you have like a 4 on you, okay, if you can get the ball in the post, and I've even seen this like in the Atlanta game in like the first quarter, like the center, like Capella's not coming over to help a ton. Sometimes because like Gobert's gravity is felt a little bit. So then in those instances, like it totally is like Karl 1-on-1 on a 4 on the post. You've got to score. Like that is something that the Wolves have to be like, okay, we've won this possession. Karl's got to score here. And if the double does come, then make the right decision, make the easy pass out and go from there. And even if you're up top, like if they are suffocating you to where you can't get a shot off, either move it or right away be like, I'm going to take a couple dribbles here, but just know that you don't always have to shoot that. And if you do suck in the nail help, make the pass out. Like when I talk about Luka, one of my favorite things about Luka is, and I've seen it at Target Center, they lose games because they go like 10 for 40 from 3 because their role players don't knock down shots. But it doesn't matter. He's making the right pass every single time. And maybe they do all miss and they go ice cold and it's like, wow, okay, they only scored 92 points because nobody can hit a 3. But over the course of the season, if you make the right play again and again and again and again, you're going to win.
And the numbers bear it out, right? With Luka, you look at any of the pick and roll numbers, you look at the pick and roll, like plus it is over 100 possession sample size, 1,000 possession sample size. It's so much more effective than the number 2 and a mile ahead of like the median player who does that at a high volume. And I think what we're saying with Cat is he kind of feels more like the median, right? In that area when you're like, I just should be better.
And for me, it's mostly like Ant and Cat, like they will maybe make the right play once, and then like if that shot gets missed by like their teammate, it's like not doing that again.
Yeah,
it's like and it's like, okay, you know what? I'm just gonna shoot it because we haven't scored now in 3 possessions because we just got an open one, but we missed it. So maybe I should take a contested one. Or Karl's like, I need to get to the bucket. And it's like you're trying to drive through your defender and then the nail help defender, and now you're ending up 10 feet away on that runner that you're like almost behind the hoop as you put it up and
going left and shooting it with the right.
And then you're like falling down to the floor and throwing your arms up, and it's 5-on-4 the other way. Yeah, because it's a really tough shot. And it leads to transition the other way because you inevitably fell down because you're going like 20 miles an hour as you head towards the bucket.
I want to go through it and count those. Like I would get like 10 games in the season, and on his drives, what happens on the possession going the other way?
The ensuing defensive possession. Yeah.
Because when he's not scoring on a drive, half the time, maybe more than half the time, he falls over. Would you say that's fair to say?
Yeah.
And then it's 5-on-4 the other way if it's a miss. Not to mention it's a miss close to the basket, and so maybe got Rudy down there, and it leads to. I mean, that's a big part of when we talk about the transition defense. I mean, that's another thing I had written down with Karl in these meltdowns is just the overall team's transition defense. The drives are one example of that, but it's also just the general intention,
general
to
urgency.
Get back. Yeah,
even like that's where I saw it's not even like in the third quarter against Atlanta. It's not even like turnover 2-on-0 dunk or something. It's like it is like 4-on-4, but like
they're
Rudy's
running.
not
The other team's running fast.
Yeah, Rudy's not getting all the way to the rim, or like, and they're bad at picking people up. You know, like they're just not good at defending in transition in terms of like body, like matching up. And not even like your own match, but it's like get somebody. And now like there's one where like 4 guys pick up 3 and there's somebody under the hoop for Atlanta. And it just is like an easy, like just like I think Trae Young or somebody just passes to a wide open guy at the rim. And it's like, why didn't Rudy just run all the way back to the paint? Instead, he's like helping pick somebody up, like stopping ball on where somebody's already stopping ball. It's just they need to do a much better job, I think, in organization of transition, but they're just so like they're kind of slow, and I think there's just not a great chance for them to just run back and pick up. Like, so they're just always like, when you're running in stride with the other team, like it's hard then to match up with anybody.
So to the transition thing, because I think this is related to Carl, not only Carl, this is a perfect example of, this is Finch too, this is Rudy too, this is the team. But we know last season that when Towns and Gobert were on the floor, opponents played in transition 16.3% of the time. Whatever, that sounds like a random number. That's like the equivalent of Utah, who was last in transition defense last year in terms of the frequency in which they allowed it. 16% of possessions is how often the Wolves were allowing that with Towns and Gobert on the floor last year. Bad. Well, if you look at the 3 games thus far this season against Toronto, it was 25% of the possessions that Toronto got out in transition. Against Miami, which I thought felt better. It felt better than the Toronto game, but it was still 17. It was just as bad as it was last year. And then you look at the Atlanta game, 19.8%. And this team has not gotten better at limiting transition opportunities for the opponent. And specifically to Carl and Rudy, it's 23.9% of possessions, almost 1 in 4 possessions. And again, we're through 3 games, and a lot of that was probably in time, the third quarter in the Toronto game, where it was just like every single time Toronto was going, or kind of almost the whole second half against Atlanta, where every single time they're going. This is not going to work if these are the numbers. I mean, it has been every game in transition defense thus far this season has been worse than last year. And it's another striking resemblance to the beginning of last season, when was the transition defense the worst? Right away at the beginning of the year. And we had all these excuses of Carl was sick and Rudy Eurobasket, all this, like continuity wasn't there. Well, we were told continuity over and over again. We were told this was a point of intention with this group all training camp over and over again. And it's a classic example of something that they're saying that they're doing. And I believe they're talking about it. They're just not acting on it on the floor. And I think if it's Carl, I mean, a lot of that is Carl at the 4, not because he's necessarily lazy, but he's being put in a position where he's not used to needing to sprint back. He's used to crashing the glasses. He did the first 7 years of his career.
Right.
And then he just doesn't always have the intention. I mean, the Okongwu just outran him for that tip dunk in transition. There's just been a lot of it. So I with Carl, I go again to the, like, can you stem the tide offensively by just asserting yourself when things are falling apart? And when things are falling apart, can we just at a minimum get back on defense? Maybe the team starts off on a 14-2 run and Finch goes, or Carl takes it upon himself, like, maybe I'm not going for offensive rebounds right now. We guys got to slow this game down and play it in the half court a little bit more, where we are very confident in our half court defense. But it sucks to be talking about it again, but man, this transition defense stuff is a problem.
It's a big problem, and it's always going to be a little bit opponent dependent. Like, this is where like the Wolves are only like 2.5 point underdogs to Denver tonight. And people are like, how is it not that big? Denver like is so good at what it does that like Denver's not going to have the same intention about getting out in transition as opponents. I don't think like you see like a Toronto and it's like, let's just run.
I mean, Jokic is going to try and outlet them, but
like throw it down to the court, but it's not like a ball is made. Go, Jokic
agreed.
will have a few examples, and like Denver like embarrassed Minnesota on a few possessions last year, where it was like
it's a hit ahead pass.
Yes, how does that turn into transition? It's not going to be like every possession we are bolting. Like it's not going to be a significant part of the game plan. Like this is how we
like it was for Toronto.
Correct, right? And that's where like Now Denver is just more comfortable with what it can do in the half court. If something's obviously there, great, take it, but they're not going to just push it because to push it.
Yeah.
So like that's where like Minnesota gets to play more half court defense, and then you see how it matches up from there. Like, but so many of these opponents, and this I stand by. This is why they lost to lesser teams last year and will be very vulnerable to lose to lesser teams this year. When you've got a team like a Portland, that's all they want to do. Like they can't really run sets and stuff. They just want to push. They've got a bunch of young athletes who just want to get out in the open court. So they are automatically playing to take advantage of Minnesota's biggest deficiency, just because that's what they want to do anyway. So like that's why I do think like teams that are just not capable of running like much of an offense or much structure and just are young and athletic, like I think those are the teams that will always provide Minnesota problems, even if they provide nobody else in the league any problems.
Well, and those teams are not going to want to play the Wolves in the half court, because I think the Wolves are going to be an awesome half court defensive team this year.
Absolutely, same here. But those teams can't play half court offense anyway, so they don't want to. Like against literally anybody. So then it's just how much can we get up and down? Let's try to get up and down every single possession. And the Wolves, even on possessions where you'd be like, this shouldn't be a transition opportunity, it can be if you're super aggressive with it. So I do think that's just a major thing, and we'll see how it plays out this year against like the bad teams. Where it's like, how is this game so close? Because they've literally lived in transition. So you've got these guys who are, like still very much developing, but they can get up and down the court and hit an open three in transition or a layup or whatever.
And it's the Luka thing, man. Like transition offense. Like we do all these numbers like 1.2 points per possession versus 0.9, and you go 0.3. Like what does that really mean?
It's 30 points over the game.
Over the 100 possessions, it is, and that's the difference. Luka is that level of pick and roll player where the median player is a 0.9. Like it's the same thing where it's when it's happening over and over again, it's gonna make a 8, 9, 12 point difference in the course of the game. And until this group finds ways to stem that, they're going to be going against that 8 to 10 point transition deficit a night, and maybe even more, because this Wolves team is not a transition offense team. Like the differential between where this team is in transition offense versus transition defense this year is going to be huge, even if they get better at transition defense. So it's obviously it's a point of emphasis, but it needs to be a point of change for this team for sure.
It's so weird that when this team was constructed, it was like, well, it should be a really good regular season team, and we'll see how they do in the playoffs. But now, like with just like their inability to play in transition on either way, it's like actually they're much better suited for the playoffs, where teams really don't get up and down. Like it's the exact opposite of what we thought. And that was obviously one Denver matchup. I don't know how other people would have attacked their big thing in general, but like it is more built for the playoffs because like it's just not as much of an up and down game.
In that way, I mean, I think that's probably a separate podcast.
Just I agree with
what you're saying. Yeah,
it's just their biggest bugaboo. It really is. Like so, like at least that is negated.
No, I was shocked to look at like what the transition numbers were, and it's been every game. Every game.
You just pointed at the Hawks thing. It was 1.62 points per transition opportunity. That means the Hawks were scoring almost every time. Yeah. Like I mean, that is incredible.
Yeah, not good. All right, let's talk briefly about the Denver game, just by looking at where the Wolves prize picks are for this game. I like clicked on this and I didn't like do any research because I just want to go into this looking at this blind. The only page I have pulled up thus far is points in this game. Ant 24.5, Jaden 9.5. I thought that Jaden number is that a little low. Carl 20.5, Conley 10.5, Rudy 13.5 points. Any of those stick out to you? Or I guess this is a different way of saying, do you expect one of the Wolves 5 starters in a Denver matchup to be particularly effective tonight?
Well,
it doesn't need to be like specific to what the prize pick number is.
Yeah,
but like,
all I remember, like, I mean, it's hard not to just go to like the playoff series and like Denver just had nobody for Ant. I mean, they just had nobody. And obviously, like Ant in the playoffs seems to raise his game to a different level. But I do think 1 and 2, this is a big matchup, defending champs. Like he will get up for that. I would think
like he kind of did for the Memphis games last year. After the Memphis,
yeah. I think Ant would clear 24.5 points. They just don't really have an answer for him. Not that many teams do, but like if Ant brings his game, they didn't seem to. He looked like he was unstoppable in that playoff series with Denver at even full strength. So that's where I would go.
It was an interesting thing last year. Just thinking back to that Denver series where their best player for guarding Ant and their best player for guarding Cat was Aaron Gordon.
Yes.
And
yeah,
they
it
chose
is.
to put Aaron Gordon on Cat.
Right.
You know,
And they won.
understandably.
So
yeah.
like,
yeah, it's just, I think you can't make a decision until you see before you
right.
see
That's what's hard, because if you told me Aaron Gordon's on Cat, so I do think that's how it would play out. Like they would put Aaron Gordon on Cat. So for me, that would go, okay, Anthony Edwards, more than 24.5 points, Cat, fewer than 20.5 points.
Yeah. And like you said, Cat hasn't had 20.5 yet. I don't know what the Jaden minutes restriction thing is. We'll ask Finch about that tonight at the game. If Jaden, he played 24 against Atlanta. If he's to 30, I just think this says 9.5 here for him. And I'm thinking of Jaden as a 10 plus points per game guy, 80% of games this year. Like I just think the opportunities are easy, even if the usage doesn't go up much, like given how effective his opportunities can be. And if he's shooting the ball again, which early example of the Atlanta game, like maybe he is just that high 30s 3-point guy. I think Jaden should consistently be a more than 10 points a game guy. So I would say that for this one. I haven't really looked at any other ones here. Does rebounds, is that worth looking at here? Ant 4.5. That's seeming like kind of a low number for him. Credit to Ant, actually. Thus far this season, there's been way more intention about rebounding for him. I kind of like the over on all three of these. Ant, more than 4.5 rebounds. Carl, more than 8 rebounds. Rudy, more than 11. I mean, it's probably not smart to take all of those. But I think this is going to be a better defensive rebounding team this season, which I think over the course of the year, Rudy averaged like 11.5 per game last season. I would anticipate that being over 12, maybe even 13 a game over the course of the season this year. But maybe those three kind of cannibalize each other in some ways. What have you just thought about the Wolves rebounding thus far this year?
Definitely improved. I think for sure. And Ant has been a part of that. Like, I don't feel like they're getting beat on as many long rebounds either. It's not, at least it has not to date through 3 games. There were definitely games last year where you could point out and be like, yeah, they lost this game on the glass, and they have not done that yet this year. So that's a pretty big step forward. I think that is the one thing, like close Wolves observers, that would be their biggest positive from this year, is just the improvement in that department.
Yeah. I also just noticed Jokic 11.5 rebounds. I will say he would get more than that. Obviously, we're not going to go through every one of these categories, but if you're watching on YouTube, you can see here, we don't normally, or haven't yet this year, really looked at the NBA ones. They have points plus rebounds plus assists in a game for obviously not just the Wolves, but all of these assists, defensive rebounds, three-pointers made, all that sort of stuff. So if you want into, now that it's NBA season, try out Prize Picks NBA version. Obviously that's up there, and they have plenty of Wolves options. So if you are watching Wolves Nuggets tonight, or maybe you're listening to this later this week and you're thinking about it for Wolves Jazz, check that out there. I do think this is the time of year where a lot of these numbers, numbers are based on last year's stuff. So if you're watching the Wolves closely, like I think Ant would be a perfect example of that at 4.5. If you're a believer that Ant is going to rebound better this season, you might have some profit to be made here early on in the year, where they're going off of Ant last season, when we know Ant didn't really care about rebounding that much. So anyway,
guys around the league with like scoring and whatnot too, where it's like, well, this year they're probably going to be this type of scorer, like it's like somebody who's maybe like, oh, well, last year he averaged 20.5, so like his number's at 20.5, but you fully expect him to be a 25 point per game kind of guy this year, like those types of things.
100%.
Yeah,
it's like I was doing my waivers for fantasy football before this, and it's like once you get to the middle of the season, there's like all the guys have we've kind of figured out what the roles are.
You know who they are. It's totally like outside of major injury, it's like what to expect.
You make your money in fantasy football on the waiver wire like weeks 1 through 3, right? When people haven't really picked up on how the roles have shifted. So I think that's where how these over-unders kind of work here as well. So anyways, that's prizepicks.com, prizepicks app, promo code Dane for a $100 sign-up bonus. Jace, I will see you at the game tonight. We will see how this Wolves team matches up against a team that I got so much credit for being a great matchup against. And we're not going to super go into that right now. I think there's reasons to believe that some of that is true. I have some skepticism on some angles of some of that stuff. But here's an opportunity, right? If you're the Wolves, like you really messed it up on Monday against Atlanta. Right. You got an opportunity against the defending champs who you believe in that locker room, in that coaching staff, they believe that they match up well with Denver. Well, here you go. Show it. Get yourself back on track. Get to 2-2. Let's not let this spiral into 1-3. When you got Utah and Boston coming up next here too, like the attention to detail, the things we listed off today that have led to these meltdowns, you got to check those boxes, man. You're playing the Nuggets, so I'm interested to see how the Wolves respond tonight.
Check them for 48 minutes. I mean, or check them for 44 minutes. Like, then Denver's the type of team that will hit you in the mouth for a couple runs. Like, don't fold. Don't revert back to bad basketball. I do think one of the reasons why they match up well with Denver, and I don't want to go too deep down this road either, is like that is where like anti-isolation ball, when you really don't have somebody who can match up with him, like it works. And Nikola Jokic is not like this ultimate rim protector. Like, so like and ISO ball, where even it gets bad, it's like not great offense. It works out better at a higher clip than it would at other times. But like, just play good basketball for 4 quarters and see where you stack up. I wouldn't be surprised if Denver is also like, yeah, we know Minnesota pushed this last year. We've heard that they think they're a great matchup. All these things, like Denver is really good at coming up with their own motivations through Mike Malone for reasons to come out and show things. Wouldn't be surprised at all if Denver brings a great effort either.
You know, I should have thought of this while we were doing looking at the points. I think Rudy Gobert is going to have more than 13.5 points in this game. What triggered this in my mind is you bring up Jokic at the rim, where he is very underrated, actually in his ability to just kind of get in the way,
defend at the rim. Yes.
But watching them play against Utah, there was ample situations where they were just able to throw it over the top of Jokic once they got downhill, and it was Kessler. I think Kessler was like 10 of 11 from the field or something like that, and had like 20 points. And it was in the exact same way, where it was like Talen Horton-Tucker coming downhill. Jokic has to come up a little bit and let's just throw it over the top of his head. Kessler lob threat over and over again. Whether that be for 13.5 points or not, like that should be a point of intention, and a way to hurt this Nuggets team is to take advantage of your size and your vertical ability, that you reach higher than Jokic. So I guess
it's a much better look than 6 feet out.
Like, to your point.
I mean, it's time and time again. It's like, these are those things like, okay, Anthony Edwards, you're in year 4. You've got all the tape from the game that Dane just watched, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of tape of. It'll play through in the locker room pregame. We'll show like these opportunities. Consistently take advantage of it. Don't do it once and we're like, oh, maybe they're figuring something out. Do it 4 times.
It's there.
4 times. It's take advantage of easy buckets, see the game, and adapt to the game, and just play it the right way.
It's been better at that thus far this season. The lobs to Rudy have been,
but it's not like.
Well, let's acknowledge it's been better too. Like,
yes, I agree. It's been better. It's a growing process. It's just something they're hammering home so much that I would love to see a game where it is so intentional, like on just time and time again until it's not there. Yep. And now they're in between, and now you can attack.
Yep.
With like your traditional vigor and have it be very successful.
Absolutely. All right. Jace wrote about this kind of who's to blame, where are the meltdowns coming from topic. You can read that over at the Pioneer Press. Obviously, you can follow Jace on Twitter at Jace Frederick. Britt and I will be back sometime, I think, on Thursday afternoon to talk about what goes on in this Denver game. No Kyle this week. On Friday, he's out of town. So this episode, Britt episode on Thursday, that's all we'll have for this week. Jace, appreciate you doing it. I'll see you at the game. Until Thursday with Britt. He's Jace, I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hard so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.